Well, far too many people have experienced childhood trauma. This has turned out to be devastating for many, while others have somehow managed to overcome. Today's guest is one of the latter. Michael Menard is a childhood trauma expert who, despite having a traumatic childhood himself, has had remarkable success in life. He became the vice president of engineering at Johnson & Johnson and founded the group Genocide Group, a consulting and software company advising major corporations like Coca-Cola and NASA. He is a best-selling author. His latest book, The Kite That Couldn't Fly, will be released in June. Michael, welcome to Bridge City News. So great to have you on today and wonderful to meet you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Tell us about your upcoming book, The Kite That Couldn't Fly, and your inspiration for writing it. It's a deeply personal story, isn't it?
It is. It started as a memoir. I'm one of 14 children, and we grew up in a home of below the poverty line with a mother that was just a saint, a lovely woman of Christ who taught us about Christ and the Bible, and also with a father who was shaped by his own trauma. So we grew up in a home of neglect, abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, and we just thought that was life. So I decided to write a memoir about my experience as a childhood, really to just capture for my children and my grandchildren my story. And I included all my brothers and sisters, and I wrote the book, drafted the book. I asked a couple of psychiatrists and psychologists to join and to help me unpack the book and make sure I wasn't saying anything incorrect or triggering. And what that team said was that what I and my family experienced was complex childhood trauma, and immediately wanted to treat me and my siblings. I have never felt the need for treatment, but I understood the challenges of my childhood. Having said that, I went on to have a very successful career, as Jeanette listed there. But there was also some siblings that didn't fare as well. So there's this paradox of trauma. There's a paradox that is kind of not really known well, but some sufferers experience post-traumatic growth after childhood trauma. No one knows why. Others collapse under that pressure, and they experience disorders, anxiety, depression, failed relationships, addiction, medical issues. Several of my siblings fall into that category, sadly. I've lost two brothers to drug addiction that I'm quite sure had its roots in childhood trauma. No one knows why some of us wobble and some of us collapse within the same environment. But a very important note that if you are one of those who have experienced post-traumatic growth, you are not immune to the disorders that may erupt later in life. It doesn't make you exempt.
No, exactly. First of all, I'm very sorry to hear about your two siblings there. That's absolutely
Thank you.
terrible. It looks like while researching for your book, you found there were a lot of findings that you've sort of
It
discovered
was
regarding
it,
childhood
it,
trauma.
it was amazing. So as part of this process, I mentioned I enlisted a panel of mental health experts to help me understand what happened and maybe offer some reflections to the reader after each chapter,
Mhm.
so that it could help parents, help sufferers, to do that. And when I talked to them, they were really shocked at the experiences of my experiences and my family. So they wanted me to go into therapy, which I rejected. But actually, some of my siblings have gone into therapy now with great results. So what I found, a couple of things. I found what the definition of childhood trauma is, and just to run through that quickly, the CDC talks about childhood trauma as events, and they call that an adverse childhood trauma. And that could be neglect. Neglect means not enough food, not enough shelter, not enough heat, no medical attention. And trauma isn't just about what happened to you. Trauma could also be about what didn't happen, and that's neglect. Then there's abuse, physical abuse, that's beatings and physical harm, sexual abuse, and then finally mental abuse, which is shaming, criticism, growing up in a home with fighting parents, which, by the way, is 1 out of 4 families in the U.S. today. Being raised in a home with addiction or mental illness, being from a fatherless home. There's 20 million children in North America that are living in fatherless homes, and that brings its own trauma. And finally, being a victim of separation or divorce. So that's childhood trauma. What I found, I went into a funk when I started the research, and I was uncharacteristically for me, I was experiencing depression, some anxiety, and I was going deep into the research, and
Right.
I was mourning what I realized had happened to my siblings.
Yeah,
And
you
for
were
some
opening
reason,
up those wounds and suddenly
exactly,
realizing.
exactly, and I my wife saw the hole that I had dug, and then I was going deeper into that hole through this research and the suffering and actually reliving, and she lovingly grabbed my shoulder and said it was time to get out of the hole. And she suggested I grab that little boy's hand
Mhm.
and go back to that May Avenue house and tell that child everything's going to be okay.
Oh, oh, that's so
So,
emotional.
so that was a moment of release for me, and some therapy in of itself. Um, so yeah, I found so much. I found that the big news in my mind, and what I hope the book can do or communicate, is that there is a crisis. There is a crisis worldwide. Dr. Glenn Giraldi, which has become my friend, and he's really the authority on childhood trauma, and he's written 7 books on the subject. He says that childhood trauma may well be called the #1 unaddressed public health concern in the world today, and that the trauma leaves devastation in the wake of everyone who's experienced it. So the CDC reports that in the US alone, there's 150 million adults walking around suffering from childhood trauma. That's 62%. Of those 150 million, 44 million have experienced complex childhood trauma, like me and my siblings. Those 44 million will die on an average of 20 years too soon. Just think about that. And
Awful.
it's happened in my family. My brothers died 50 years before their time. 41% of all depression in North America is from childhood trauma. There are 20 million, as I said, 20 million children in fatherless homes. There's 5 million children in foster care.
Mhm.
They all suffer childhood trauma. And the World Health Organization says there's over 1 billion people in the world today that are suffering from childhood trauma.
You know, and in your book, Michael, you write that childhood trauma actually rewires the brain. Can you maybe unpack that a bit?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Um, I'll answer the question kind of what happens to a child that suffers this, and this is all new for me, and this is part of the mourning uh, and the crisis, is that when a child experiences trauma, all the type of traumas that I mentioned, their brain chemistry changes, and it changes at the root of their brain, the deepest part of their brain. The brain development changes, their biology changes, and then in later life, even decades later, these disorders begin to appear unannounced. You know, we're taught to be aware, avoid danger, look both ways before you cross the street. But this type of danger you cannot prepare for. You just need to know that when it happens, there may be reasons why. And The disorders come in the form of depression, anxiety, failed relationships, as I said, and a whole basket of medical ailments: high blood pressure, obesity, cancer. The top 5 causes of death come from childhood trauma. So it's a silent crisis and a silent killer that I really stumbled upon, just by the research of this book, and now I've had that research validated by all types of authorities, and most of them say it's even understated.
That is incredible. How would someone recognize that a child is going through a trauma? And I mean, if we saw that, how should we respond to it?
Yeah, it's there's 2 categories to be aware of. One is children that are being, in the school systems, and the churches should be watching for this. And this is just abnormal behavior. People, a child lashing out, a child being inappropriate, with sexual talk or sexual action, anger, fits, wanting to hurt other people. That's what you see in children. And that's when it's happening. But years later, talking about adults from, let's say, 21 to death, what you find in those people are depression, anxiety, flare-ups, relationships in turmoil constantly for no real reason, health issues. In the book, The Body Keeps the Score, it's just a brilliant book on how the body deteriorates as a response to stress, and particularly childhood trauma stress.
Unbelievable.
So those are the things to look for. And if you're feeling that something must change, you don't know what it is, something must change in your life, that could be a real reason to dig deeper and to find out maybe what happened to you.
Right. At what point in your life, Michael, did you realize that you had problems stemming from childhood trauma and that you needed to get some help?
Well, the first one, I was a young executive at Johnson and Johnson on a fast track, and because of the success and the potential for very high positions in the company, I was assigned a industrial therapist to see if I could live under the pressure of being the CEO, as an example.
Wow. Okay.
And through those tests, they said it's a slam dunk. I could do the job. But they found that my level of happiness, my well-being, on a scale of 1 to 10 was about a 2. And that my success was coming from, I didn't know then, but my success was coming from an addiction to material goods and success, when really what was happening is I just didn't want to run out of anything. And I didn't realize that until I'm now 73, and in this research and talking with the mental experts, I realized that's one of my addictions. That's one of my responses. In addition to that, I struggle with obesity. I struggle with eating too much and ordering that extra pizza, because, again, I realize now that it was just from not wanting to be hungry. And it took me how many years? 60 years to figure that out and to deal with that.
Wow. Now we're almost out of time here, but your mom taught you about faith in Jesus, and you believe that prayer and faith are key to bringing healing to people suffering from childhood trauma. So maybe explain really quickly why that's so important.
Yeah, very, very quickly. Yes, my mother taught us the power of prayer. She taught us, I saw miracles. I know the power of prayer and I know that it works. But we as Christians suffer because we have this misbelief or mistranslation of the scripture, asking you shall receive. We think that kind of comes from maybe the name it and claim it theology
Oh,
that
right.
sounds great to the ear. But the Lord provides. He provides whatever we need and provides the healing, but prayer is not enough. I had a brother, he's 75, a man of God, has been trying to pray away his anxiety and depression for 20 years without success, wondering why the Lord has not been answering his prayers. But through this research, he realized he was praying for the wrong thing. He needs to pray to align himself with God's will. And immediately he sought counseling and was treated by a Christian therapist using EMDR therapy for childhood trauma. And in 7 sessions, in 7 hours, he was rid of that. And he's pretty sure it's forever. So,
Wow.
churches are full of unhappy people. And church is partly the reason for that. Some churches, but it's because they're praying for the wrong thing. They think good deeds and having more faith is going to heal them. It will not. Your pastor's not going to heal you. He may help, but you need to turn to what God has provided for us in physicians and therapists to reach fullness that he wants us, the fullness that he wants us to reach.
Wow, that's incredible. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but there's so much to unpack here. But thanks so much for being with us today
It's a
and
pleasure.
sharing your story, Michael. Really appreciate that.
Welcome, Jeanette.
Absolutely. Michael Menard is the author of The Kite That Couldn't Fly, which will be released in June. And it's available at thekitethатcouldn'tfly.com and anywhere the books are sold. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.